You see what it is, man. It's your boy D11 Auto. I'm about to be working on a Chrysler 300 today, changing out the rack and pinion. Stay tuned so I can show you guys what's going on. To start, you want to take off these bolts right here, the 13 millimeters. That's holding the windshield wiper bracket to the car. You got to get that removed first. 4 bolts. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 bolts. 18, 13 millimeters. There's a couple of star bits right there. 1, 2 on the back side. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on this front side. Another thing is these windshield wiper arms have to come off. All you got to do is pop out the plastic cover that was on top of it, and that'll expose the bolt, or I mean nut. That'll expose the nut. I think that's a 13. This one is actually a 15 millimeter socket. Next, you want to remove the air intake duct. Just pop this little gasket out like that. Take this tube off, undo this hose over here. The locking tab goes left to be in locked position. Right means unlocked. Okay, once you get that off, there's a couple of 16 millimeter bolts down there, one right there, one on the other side, and then 2 10 millimeters on top. Those gotta all come loose. It's the same on the opposite end. Okay, what has to happen next is that little sleeve down in there. That sleeve right there needs to be pulled back so you can expose the steering column coupler. Right now it's covered. You guys need to pull that back and you'll be able to expose the coupler. This right here only has 3 10 millimeter bolts. Just detach those bolts and it should just be able to get out your way. There's also a clip right here that needs to come out. You just press the little tab. Right here. There we go. There's the tab. Now this is out the way. And that gives you better access down in here. Okay, so as you guys can see, I couldn't get this bolt out back here because as I would try to go up on it with the swivel, it would hit the top of this bar, or the bottom of this bar. So now I'm going to remove that 10 millimeter bolt to get this bar out of my way so I can get that bolt out. I want to warn you guys, when you take off that bolt, that line is charged. This is an AC line. So do not take off that bolt. I made the mistake of taking the bolt off and now it's sprayed everywhere. I recommend you guys do not take that bolt off. Just figure out a different way. But now that we've got that bolt out, I can get this bolt in the back out and we can continue forward. See this right here? This is the cover that goes over the steering coupler. That's the thing that connects to the steering wheel. So all that needs to happen is this needs to get pulled back. And since the tie rods are connected still, it's kind of resisting the pullback. So actually we got to disconnect the tie rods first. So yeah, since this doesn't come with tie rods, it means we don't have to disconnect it on the bottom, only the top. That's what that means. Because we're going to be reusing these same tie rods. So there's no point of disconnecting them if we're going to be reusing them. Okay, so the next step is to drain the power steering fluid. There's a hose on the top and there's a hose on the bottom. The hose on the top is the return line. The hose on the bottom is the send out line. So disconnect the hose on the bottom, let that drain into an oil pan, and then disconnect the tie rods in the center, and that thing should be free to take out. Let's get started. The easiest way to get that bottom hose out is to remove the 10mm bolt holding the power steering fluid reservoir onto the car. Then that should loosen up the whole reservoir, so you can get an angle at that clip, because that clip is hard to reach while it's mounted down. So that's a quick tip. What needs to happen next, there's some tabs right there covering those bolts. You gotta get a flathead screwdriver in there, hammer it on the end to wedge it in there, and then we gotta pull those tabs backwards so we can get to those bolts. Okay, now that you got the bolts out of the tie rods that connect to the rack and pinion, this thing is completely free now, able to be removed out the car. The only thing that's stopping it is this power steering return line, and then the power steering input send out line. I really don't know which one of these is return and send out yet, and that's very important when we are reinstalling the new one, that we put these in the right spot. So okay, now once you got these 18mm bolts, or I don't even know what you want to call them, undone, now you'll be able to pull this out. This should be able to pull straight back. And it's still not trying to pull back. So if it doesn't want to pull back, that means you got to pull that flap up. Okay, so I couldn't get that plastic cover. The plastic was too thick and stiff, so I had to cut it open. Then once I got in there and I was able to see what I need to center punch, I needed to center punch one of these pins through inside of there, and I realized there's not enough clearance above to hit it with the hammer. So that means we're gonna have to get that special tool, which is gonna set us back a whole day. But hey, you know, we're this far, so I'll be back tomorrow to finish the job. We'll get the tool, we'll remove that part, then we will install the new one tomorrow. Okay, so let me show you guys. Let me turn the flash on. Inside of here, there's a pin right there. It's not an Allen head. It's a pin, and you gotta hammer that through. But because there's no clearance inside of here, as you guys can see, you can't get a hammer over here. There's no clearance. It's all the way deep down tucked inside there. So since there's no clearance to hit a hammer down and pop that that pin through, we have to go underneath the steering wheel and we have to remove, let me get up in here. We got to remove that right there. There's a little pin on the end of the bolt that needs to come out. Then once you get that out, you can take the nut off, and that detaches the steering wheel from that, which will be able to let you pull that back with the whole steering rack. So let's get on it. Okay, once you get the bolt out, make sure you make a mark on this side and a mark right here on this side so you know exactly which sides need to match up when you put it back in. For me, it's the 256ABA side. And I'm not going to move the steering wheel at all. And now you should be able to just push this through. So you guys can see. So now you have easier access to the pin right there. And when you take this off, you want to mark it. Okay, now when you guys are getting this cotter pin out, this is the way to do it without any special tools. Grab a drill bit. Make sure the end of that drill bit is actually the same diameter as the pin, because if it's skinnier than the pin, try to drill and you try to hammer that in there, it's just going to expand the pin. It's not going to go anywhere. So it has to be the same size as the pin. Okay. And once you get that off, don't lose that pin. There it is. You got that shit out. Now, you got your steering rack disconnected. So you should be able to just take this straight out the car. And then I also wanted to explain how I got the new rack inside the car, because I didn't get to show you guys the physical proof. To get the new rack in, I angled it like this and made it go through inside of here. Came through. Then once I got enough clearance up here, pushed it down and then pushed it forward inside of there. Another tip, while you're pounding in the pin, put a piece of wood underneath the power steering rack to give it that stability that it needs. Alright, now once you got your pin back in, if you can't remember, the top hose is this one, the bottom hose is this one. I remember because I made a mental note as I was going. But when you guys are when you guys are installing these onto your new steering rack, you always want to replace the gasket. So go ahead and take the gasket off and put a new one on, because those gaskets will go out way faster if you don't do it. And this is a very good tool for taking out gaskets. Just poke the corner right in there. Gasket will come right off. But remember, you want to save these gaskets so you can match them up to the new one. Let's see. So that's gonna be the new one right there. You see how skinny? See how skinny the old one is to the new one? That's what happens when rubber gaskets sit over time. They get stiff and they shrink. So you always want to replace your gaskets or you could have a leak. Okay, now with your new gaskets installed, you can go ahead and slide this forward. Well, actually, you want to attach the knuckle underneath the steering wheel next before you put those lines in. So let's do that. It's kind of hard to do it while holding the camera, but we're getting it done. Alright, now that you tighten down your steering column bolt underneath the dash, that was a 13mm, by the way. I forgot to say that. Now, you gotta get your open end 18. I think those are 18s. Yep, and tighten those down into their spots. Okay, so when I went to install the steering rack, or I should say when I went to put the tie rods attached into the steering rack, I actually encountered a problem. The problem I encountered, I'll show you guys right now, is the tie rod right there. If you can see, there's the end of the tie rod, and it's supposed to match up with a hole that's inside of the steering rack. But if you can see, let me get on the other side actually. But if you can see, these holes don't match up. So when I went to install the steering column, I found that the holes don't match up. See that? There's no way for the hole, for the bolt to go into the hole because it doesn't even match up. So I had to adjust the tie rod. The passenger side tie rod I had to adjust about an inch, half an inch to an inch to this way. The other side I gotta adjust it. Which way? The hole's right here, the bolt's right there, so it has to come this way about 1/4 of an inch. So I just wanted to show you guys that. The tie rods weren't perfectly aligned, so now I had to take off this tire and adjust this one as well. So when you do this, let me grab a light. When you do this, make sure you loosen this bolt. That's the bolt that keeps the tie rod locked into place. That's the pinch bolt. You want to loosen the tie rod pinch bolt. So here's the bar. We want to loosen it. So lefty loosey, righty tighty. Then It's not even spinning. Okay, once you get your bolts lined up, which I already have, you can go down here and tighten down your pinch bolts on both sides. Once you know you're for sure lined up. Make sure your steering wheel is straight as possible on both sides before you call that a done deal. Then after you tighten your pinch bolts down, then you can proceed to tighten all these down, tighten everything down, reverse order pretty much, put it all back together. You guys don't need to see all that because you've seen me take it apart, so I'm going to go ahead and put everything back together.